Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond. You can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And again, you can also catch the rebroadcast of this on a variety of other stations on Friday nights from 11 to 1 a.m. So thank you all so much for tuning in today. Quick little announcements or things I just want to update the listeners on. Thank you so much to Jeffrey and Jeard, and I know I'm probably butchering your name, but thank you both for signing up to the Porkins Policy Radio Patreon campaign. Thank you so much. I've gotten quite a few people this month and in the previous months as well. And a lot of new people signing up for the Porkins Great Game Patreon. So thank you all who have signed up for that as well. I'm not going to go through all of those right now. I don't have the list right out in front of me. And of course, you will all get a special thank you on Porkins Great Game. And we will have a new episode of Porkins Great Game probably the final week in December. It's just been a little busy for Christoph and I. But we do have a whole episode planned out. And, of course, as I mentioned before, there have been some changes. So if you subscribe at the $5 limit, you will also get access to the bonus podcast for Porkins Great Game. So definitely look forward to that. We will have another bonus podcast for Porkins Policy Radio coming up very soon as well. But anyway, today I am joined by a good friend of the show, a frequent guest and collaborator, someone who I'm positive everybody will know, even from the faithful listeners to the brand new ones. And that is, of course, my good friend Tom Secker. Tom, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. A little worn out, it's a busy time of year, but yeah, looking forward to talking to you tonight.
Yeah, and this is an episode that has been over a year in the making, or just about a year in the making. And this actually comes to us from a listener, Betty, who suggested that we cover this very, very strange, obscure movie called A Carol for Another Christmas. And it's and what happened exactly last year? I think we were in the middle of like Homeland madness, and we couldn't get around to doing the Christmas-themed episode that we wanted to do.
Homeland last year ran all the way up to the weekend before Christmas. So even in the week of Christmas, we were actually still having to put out a show on the last episode. So we just didn't have the time. We just couldn't do it. Yeah.
But we've now decided to fulfill Betty's promise of covering A Carol for Another Christmas. This is a bizarre movie. And of course I don't have it out right in front of me, but when did this come out? 65?
64.
64. So it's a 1964 movie. It's written by Rod Serling, who of course of The Twilight Zone. He's also wrote one of our favorite movies, 7 Days in May, which we covered on the show before. But it's written by Rod Serling, directed by none other than Joseph Mankiewicz. Of course, listeners of the CIA in Hollywood will know that Joseph Mankiewicz was the man behind the 1950s version of The Quiet American. It's got a huge, like an all-star cast, Sterling Hayden, Ben Gazzara, Britt Eklund, Peter Sellers, and a lot more famous people. Character actor Robert Shaw is in the movie. People will remember him from Russia with Love. He's the bad guy. Ton more people as well. And it was part of this kind of crazy project that was created in the aftermath of Adlai Stevenson being physically assaulted in Dallas by an anti-UN protester or crowd of protesters. And I want to say we've actually mentioned this particular event back, I think, when we covered 7 Days in May, because many of these protesters that were in Dallas were sort of riled up and organized by General Edwin Walker, who is, of course, the inspiration for the evil general in 7 Days in May, played by Burt Lancaster. And people that don't know, Adlai Stevenson went to give this speech praising the United Nations. The UN was not seen as favorably, perhaps, as it is nowadays. And Edwin Walker and, like the John Birch Society, they sort of riled up a lot of protesters. And Adlai Stevenson was actually physically assaulted. So in the aftermath of this, the UN decided that they needed to kind of build up their image. So they decided to make several TV movies. So the movies in this series were going to be on, television, on major networks. And they actually created this sort of shadowy foundation called the Telesun Foundation, which stood for Television UN. And when that was created, that would be the sort of vehicle, the producer or the production company for this film series. And Xerox, the Xerox Corporation, for whatever reason, apparently Xerox has always prided itself on being very like progressive and sort of like an activist type corporation. Xerox donated $4 million to fund these films, which is a pretty, that's a huge amount even nowadays, for a corporation to just sort of give away, especially to produce films. But back then, this was a considerable sum of money. And originally it was going to be planned that there would be 6 films in the series. They only ended up doing 4. All the major networks, aside from ABC, kind of backed out of it. So only ABC would actually run these shows or would be willing to broadcast them. They were essentially a huge sort of critical failure as well as sort of a public failure. And this is there are a variety of reasons for this. They were seen as very kind of heavy-handed, very preachy. The John Birch Society, again, it was very vocal, and they had, organized these big boycotts of Xerox and letter writing campaigns and all this sort of stuff. And the movie sort of faded away into the background. And the first one in the series, A Carol for Another Christmas, was only seen once when it was first broadcast back in 1964. And then it lay dormant for decades until Turner Classic Movies started replaying it. And I believe they found one of the older prints, one of the original prints for that. But there were some other movies in the series, including, I don't know if you saw this, Tom, but The Poppy is Also a Flower. Did you see this?
I did have a quick glance at the other ones in this series. Yeah. Which one was that?
So The Poppy is Also a Flower is, the story is by Ian Fleming. It's directed by Terrence Young, who did, Dr. No and Thunderball, I believe. And, it, again, all-star cast, including, Omar Sharif and, Yul Brynner is in it. And it's about UN narcotics agents who, expose a big shipment of heroin in Afghanistan. They irradiate it with uranium so that they can trace it from Afghanistan to Iran and then onwards, apparently all the way to, the ghettos of Harlem. And it was, again, it was a huge failure. But oddly enough, I was reading, we'll link up some interesting articles on this project, this UN project. But apparently Terrence Young left in the middle of filming, I want to say Thunderball, one of the Bond movies, to go and film this just sort of James Bond ripoff about narcotics agents. It's even got Grace Kelly at that point, the Princess of Monaco. She does the introduction for this. So which is indicative of the level of support that this UN Xerox project got from the elite of Hollywood. None of these actors or directors were paid like anything. I believe Terrence Young and Ian Fleming, for their contribution, they each got paid $1. I know in A Carol for Another Christmas, all these big name actors, including Peter Sellers, who is a real psycho, worked for scale. So really fascinating, the kind of level of support that Hollywood, or at least a certain branch of Hollywood, was willing to give to this bizarre UN project financed by Xerox. But yeah, the Poppy is also a flower. That is on YouTube as well. So you can check that out if you want to. But it is like this sort of, I looked up a couple moments, little clips and stuff from it. It is funny just to see Grace Kelly giving this very long-winded speech about the dangers of heroin and the poppy flower. But anyway, to focus on A Carol for Another Christmas, because this one is the most well-known among these four films. It is the one that has been seen probably the most since it was originally broadcast. And it is this it's a loose retelling of A Christmas Carol, featuring Sterling Hayden as Daniell Grudge, who is this sort of rich industrialist, I suppose, who's loses his son in World War II, of course, on Christmas Eve. His son's name is Marley. So again, they're referencing A Christmas Carol. And the movie starts with him arguing with his nephew over basically the UN, multiculturalism. The nephew is a professor and was involved in bringing over a Polish professor that was going to teach here, and in his place an American professor would be sent there. Of course, Daniell Grudge despises this. Thinks it's horrible. The sort of fear of communism, I suppose, is there, or the fear of the other. And after this, then Grudge is, of course, visited by the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. And in a very kind of strange way, Grudge and Christmas past are on a big steamer boat filled with dead soldiers, in coffins, and they talk about the sort of isolationist worldview and why we can't be with our heads in the ground. Then he brings him to Hiroshima, where Daniell Grudge was. And he visits with these school children that are horribly burned. The Ghost of Christmas Present shows him a refugee camp, and basically goes through a long list of statistics about displaced people and hunger and diseases. And my favorite part of the film is Christmas Future, where it's this sort of doomsday world, where society has more or less been almost entirely wiped out by nuclear war. And Peter Sellers is the sort of leader of this band of survivors. And we'll get to him later, because I think that's the most important aspect to look into. But anyway, Tom, what did you think of it? Did you like this movie? What were your sort of impressions on it?
I liked it quite a lot, to be honest. I can understand why it got so many bad reviews, and particularly from the sorts of people it got bad reviews from for political reasons. But purely as a piece of cinema, I didn't think it was half bad. I thought it was quite engrossing. I thought it wasn't overly long. And yeah, okay, it's a preachy morality tale, but it's not pretending it's not a preachy morality tale. It very much wears its heart on its sleeve, and I have some respect for that, I guess. I mean, whatever I may or may not think about the various politics expressed in the film, I think if you're going to make a political film, this isn't a bad way to do it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. I think, I'll be honest, I didn't like this movie as much as I thought I would.
No, I know.
And I had really high hopes for it, because I do love Rod Serling, and I loved the idea behind it. Just the fact that you would have the UN wanting to produce movies and some big multinational corporation is, oh, sure, here's $4 million to do it. And I do, like I said, I thought my favorite part, I thought the part that was sort of the most, I think, fascinating and perhaps pertinent to then and now is the future scene, where Peter Sellers, in a great performance, he's only on screen for like 10 minutes, 12 minutes.
Yeah.
But a wonderful performance. He's called Imperial Me. He is the ruler of the, quote, non-government of the me people. And he is like this sort of demagogue / cult leader, who trounces around in a pilgrim outfit with a cowboy hat, and plays on people's fears and stuff. And I found that to be really interesting. But I actually found the movie was like too long. Like, I wanted them to speed things up at times. And I did find it too preachy, but I do take your point that, you'd never make a movie like this nowadays. Or it would never get produced. It would never get made. It would never have this much, talent and stuff. It is funny looking at it back then, where you had these people that, were doing this because they truly believed in the political message. Whether that was, misplaced or whatever, that's up for debate, sure. But they did do it because they wanted to make a political film. Whereas nowadays, it's like, I was just talking about this with somebody recently. Matt Damon will run his mouth about every, gun control and war and this and that. And we've got to, work together. And, he loves the UN. But yet all he does is make the Bourne movies, the like quintessential, gun-toting CIA, everything he allegedly
I know exactly
is against.
What you're saying. But it's the same across the whole of the scale, though, isn't it? And you look at any of these so-called politicized celebrities these days, what do they really do apart from lend their name and face to something? Do they ever actually do anything in terms of countering the problems that they're talking about, or I don't know, using their money? Most of them have got quite a lot of money. Hollywood is not exactly a underpaid occupation if you're a George Clooney or a Matt Damon or something. So what? Are they investing in whatever, solar power or fair trade coffee farms in Kenya or whatever the hell it is that they're, would be the logical thing to actually do if you actually cared about this and had a lot of money and had fame and had the ability to do something like that? Most of the time they're not. Most of the time they are just, it's a bit of PR, and yet then they go back and they don't actually make political movies. And you're right, particularly in the case of Matt Damon, what has he really made apart from, like you say, these sort of American supremacist, gun-toting, ultra-violent, fast-paced spy films?
With the complete backing of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Yeah, certainly with some of them.
Whether he wants to admit that or not.
Well, no, I'm sure he wouldn't. Nor would, George Clooney or Grant Heslov or any of that pack.
Yeah.
But, I can understand totally why you didn't particularly enjoy this film. It's not, particularly well made, is it?
No.
It's not that well written. It does lay it on a bit thick in several places. The opening dialogue goes on way too long.
God. Yes.
It's about 3 times longer than it needs to be, given that what they're doing is setting up this conflict between him and his nephew.
Yes.
And therefore setting him up for this, I don't know, hallucination, religious experience, whatever you want to call it, a la Christmas Carol. That's and you kind of see that. I didn't even know that going into this, but I saw it coming a mile off. There are structural problems. There are some kind of weird tonal problems to it as well, that there isn't really a emotional climax to the film. There's just a sort of about an hour and 20 minutes of him being lectured at, and then he changes his mind and it's resolved at the end. And you don't really get to see his transition. You don't really understand quite why this central character goes from being this, what you might call a sort of hard right isolationist type, to being a very vague, centrist, internationalist diplomat type. I mean, I don't even know what it is how it is we would even characterize that. It's basically saying that the lecture that he's getting throughout this film is that you can't simply shut yourself off from the world. You can't simply be a total isolationist, because how would that even work? And also, of course, what do you do when some psychotic person comes and breaks down the barrier that you've built around your country, and, then it is your problem, however much you might not want it to be. And also that we've got to keep talking, that diplomacy and talking things out is somehow a way to, I don't know, avoid violence. And both of these things are, I kind of agree with them in a sort of basic sense that, that diplomacy is better than warfare. Yeah, okay, I certainly believe that. Is the UN a particularly good vehicle for that? Very, very much less convinced of that one. And also, vis-a-vis isolationism, it would be, you probably could have done it in the 19th century, most of the 20th century actually, for that matter as well. But now, it's very difficult with a globalized economy, globalized communications, all the rest of it, to just sort of be a country that only really considers its own affairs. I don't want to come across all Carol Quigley about it, but it's like the age where isolationism was actually a practical reality is kind of over. And so, like I say, in a basic sense, I kind of agree with what he's being told in this movie, but a lot of the stuff they lump in with that, and of course the ultimate conclusion that the UN is a good embodiment of these principles and these ideas. Yeah, that's the part where you just think, that's the part where it completely lost me. Yeah. I just couldn't find myself going along with that much of it. But in as much as it's, provoking that idea, that ideological conflict and talking about it somewhat, it was moderately interesting.
Well, yeah, and again, just the fact that you would never get away with making a movie like this nowadays, like a big budget one. You'll see those, kind of promotional UN things with Angelina Jolie, pretending to care about refugees and stuff. But that's not quite on the scale when you watch A Carol for Another Christmas. It's like a full-on movie. With this sort of bizarre message about how wonderful the UN is. I did actually kind of wanted to get into a little bit about Daniell Grudge and his political ideology, because I like Sterling Hayden a lot. I'm not sure if he was necessarily the best actor for this role, but I thought he did a pretty good job with what he had. And I'd love to get your take in a few minutes on Sterling Hayden's background, but I found him like this sort of interesting character because he's not really a bad person, or I didn't see him as like a bad person. He does have compassion, and particularly the scene where he comforts this young boy in Hiroshima who is like crying because of the thunder. It reminds him of when the bomb was dropped, and he does show compassion, and he genuinely seems moved to want to comfort this young boy who's obviously, had his whole life shattered. But then he, is also kind of, will rant about how, we have to have the better nuclear weapons and the faster ones, and we just got to hit them first. And he's about isolationism, but with the caveat that we should be ready to kill and, annihilate the Russians or whoever at a moment's notice. And at times, I even found some of the, like the Ghost of Christmas Past also kind of shared some of those views. Because I felt like the Ghost of Christmas Past, while opposed to war and thinks that, talking is the best solution, he also believes that we need to fight and that we're too interconnected. And almost because of the threat of nuclear war, we should be ready to fight conventionally. Or that was my impression. So again,
I think you summed that up pretty accurately. Yeah, that's sort of what I took away from that.
Which is an interesting thought to, I guess, instill that like the UN would be in favor of that. And interestingly, one of the movies that didn't get made in this series was going to be a drama about peacekeepers in Kashmir, of all places. So I guess, again, kind of laying down the groundwork for, the UN is all about talking and this and that, but we can also, there is a military component to what we do. And of course that's like half of what the UN does now are these sort of, in air quotes, peacekeeping missions, which are just, used by various countries, France in particular, to, as a sort of a cover for whatever the hell they want to do in Africa and other places. So I don't know. What did you think of Grudge's politics as a person? Because I could see people kind of looking at it both ways. And again, he's like, it seems like when something is right in front of him, he feels bad. But when it becomes an abstract thing, he's always talking about like statistics. He likes to view things like in numbers. And then of course there is a scene with the Ghost of Christmas Present where he lists all these, statistics and numbers, and it seems to affect Grudge. But what did you think of Grudge politically?
It's difficult to separate because in the story, his son dies in World War II. They both are in the military in World War II, but his son doesn't come back. And they kind of make it pretty obvious. Again, there's nothing very subtle at any part of this film.
No.
And that's kind of its major problem, is that it's trying to, seduce you to this point of view, and it's trying to persuade you and everything, but it's
slamming
not very seductive or persuasive. It's just sort of, here's our Bible, we're going to hit you over the head with it until you agree. And so in the first place, they introduced this character, Grudge, which, very much a sort of Dickensian type name. And they explain all this. And so I guess they're trying to get us to sympathize with him and to understand that some of his politics, or at least the extent to which he takes those politics, comes from this, this pain, this loss, this grieving that he's obviously still doing. I mean, that's what his nephew tells him, is that he's perpetuating his own grief and pain. So he is both a sympathetic character and one where you can understand why he has the stronger version of isolationist political views. There is very much a problem, though, that they've presented this in one character, whereas in reality there's quite a lot of different types of libertarians, isolationists, various conservatives and what have you, as well as some people on the left who would agree with at least some of that. There's all sorts of people. There's quite a spectrum of people who are, for want of a better word, isolationists in some sense or another, or at least kind of opposed to getting involved unless you strictly have to. And again, I agree with that as a principle. I don't think foreign policy should have this kind of hair trigger quality that NATO certainly has, where it's like, every single problem in the world. Oh, well, we just need to either get our own troops involved or get some jihadis involved who'll do what we say, probably, maybe. Oh, no, they didn't. Well, never mind. It's okay. We'll just carry on anyway.
Move some rockets over here.
Yeah, exactly. Just deploy some drones over there. It'll all be sorted. So I totally get the opposition to that mentality and the idea that, no, if we're going to actually militarily engage in the world, it has to be at a point when we're actually under threat ourselves. But again, the problem is an awful lot of people who do have those kinds of views, or certainly did back in the 50s and 60s, were also extremely paranoid about the threats that existed in the world and continue to be so. And that whole thing bizarrely evolved into neoconservatism, which is the opposite, which is an extremely aggressive foreign policy, but it is based on that fundamental kind of Cold War era paranoia, just where you see the world as this horrendously complex place that you have to try and bring to order because someone's got to try and bring it to order. And I guess that's maybe what they were hinting at. I don't know. That in making him a sympathetic character and in making us, therefore, somewhat sympathetic towards his views, even though the film is ultimately telling us that they're wrong, maybe they're kind of hinting at, where this can end up. And, when he's talking about that, you could just make sure the Russians know that we're not afraid to nuke them if it comes to that kind of thing. That's what I mean. It's like, well, okay, fine. You want to live inside a walled 24-bedroomed house on your own?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But to be honest, people who do that usually become extremely paranoid about the outside world and start to think everyone out there is out there to get them. So they actually did a moderately decent job of exploring that, I guess.
No, I think so too, and he also, Grudge has this irrational, like just the very fact that this professor is from Poland means that he is some sort of agent, of deception, and he's gonna corrupt the women and make all the men into pinko commies or something. It's like a professor of 18th century European literature. It's not like this guy was like a Marxist, economist that was coming over here. But he has built, as you said, this these walls around himself, and does have tremendous influence and power, and he's able to, do whatever he wants and get whatever he wants. Maybe he's, I think there was something of like a message of, we shouldn't sort of follow those sort of people. Maybe that's why the Birchers were so pissed. Maybe they saw a little bit of themselves in Daniel Grudge, and didn't like that he was sort of dismissed by all these leftists like his nephew was. I guess so. I keep coming back to but the answer is the UN, At this point in time, the UN has become so corrupt on basically every single level. And everyone that works at the UN, with the exception of, a handful of people, are so corruptible that nothing gets done at the UN that they don't want specifically done. The press corps there is a joke. If you think like the Washington, D.C. press corps are a bunch of stenographers, just go to the UN. They literally they'll kick you out for not writing favorably about them. And everyone there is corrupt. It's all about, covering up the latest sex scandal involving peacekeepers, or, covering up the latest, kickback from such and such a person to this person. And it is maybe, I guess I just wonder if this movie had an impact on people where they sort of accepted the UN and basically have not allowed, but laid down the groundwork for the UN to become this sort of life-sucking entity. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, Tom? I know that's a huge kind of question to pose.
No, it's all right. Are the UN actually mentioned in this film?
I think...
if they are, they're only mentioned briefly.
I think it comes up once with the Ghost of Christmas Future. Because in that whole sequence, he's talking about, who knows who even struck first. The Russians thought we launched. We thought the Russians launched, so nukes were everywhere. And then Grudge says, what about the UN? And Ghost of Christmas Future says something about, maybe the U.S. had left the UN or the UN had left the U.S. It didn't matter, though, because at that point, World War III had already started. So they do come up once towards the very end. But obviously, it's the implied...
sure. It's implicit in almost everything else that happens in the film. And obviously, anyone watching in 1964 would have probably twigged this. But...
was this successful propaganda?
Well, it doesn't seem to have been, because it kind of got panned by quite a lot of critics. It wasn't a popular film, I guess, but maybe that doesn't make it unsuccessful propaganda, of course, because maybe part of the point of this was to make this more of an overt political discussion. You know how I'm no, I don't really want to use the example of Donald Trump. That's terrible. But you know what I mean? That the aim may not be necessarily to persuade people. The aim may be to give people who kind of believe this, or at least have that inclination, have some kind of probably psychological reason for at least hinting and pushing in that direction, It gives them some words, it gives them some ideas and statistics, and it just gives them some things to say in conversation with people that don't agree with them. So it can, whatever. Well,
no, I see this as...
Yeah, just like I said, you know how, like whenever you're in a political discussion with the vast majority of people, most of what they're saying has come from a television broadcast or something they heard someone say on the news or an article they read in a newspaper or whatever. So maybe it's that it performed that function. And so whether or not people who watched it liked the film or hated the film or disagreed with it or whatever wasn't really the point. It was that the people who were watching it who were kind of already persuaded of that but didn't know how to say that's what they were persuaded of were given some words and things to, you know, stick those in their mouths so that they can actually have those things there ready to say when this conversation comes up. And in that sense, it probably was quite successful.
Yeah. Oh, no, I could already see, I could definitely see some, you know, self-righteous college students,
that sort of person, yeah.
Listing off all of the statistics on, you know, how many people are hungry and disease and this and that, you know, or some of the other, the sort of like philosophical arguments. And oddly enough, I think that, you know, this might seem heavy-handed when you watch it, but essentially everything that's laid out in this is like the sort of general knee-jerk reaction to, you know, if you question the UN, someone will give you the sort of condensed version of what's in this movie. That, you know, you can't put your head in the sand and, you know, talking is good. The UN is the only organization that can do this sort of diplomatic stuff.
As though diplomacy hasn't been going on for like 5,000 years.
Oh, and as if diplomacy is the the US, Russia, China, France, and England. You know, that is diplomacy at the UN. And exactly, as if diplomacy doesn't work, or that, you know, countries can't negotiate by themselves. But so in that sense, it is, I think it's funny, you know, in that, and now the UN is, although yes, obviously in like the alt media and some other, places, the UN is not viewed so favorably, but by and large, most people agree or can accept that the UN is just there and they also think that the UN does a lot of stuff that they don't. And again, that's a lot of that is condensed down from this movie. So yeah, I mean, I wonder if in that way it was quite successful, or at least in kind of like laying out the groundwork for the sort of arguments that we hear nowadays. So yeah, I mean, which I guess is just does make the movie interesting to look at from that perspective. You know, how much it's affected people's views so many years down the line. Quickly though, Tom, what about Sterling Hayden? Because you were telling, and I didn't know this, but he worked for OSS.
Yeah, I mean, he was a movie star to begin with in the 30s or whatever. I think his career started. Then he joins the Marines. At some point while he's in the Marines, I think he actually meets Bill Donovan himself, while Bill Donovan, the head of the OSS, and apparently was personally recruited by him. He was very impressed by this. I mean, Sterling Hayden is quite an impressive, you know, physical specimen in some ways, and clearly quite an intelligent man. His manner of acting shows that, you know, he isn't just some big, dumb, tall guy who looks good on a camera. He has the ability to deliver things. He's excellent as Jack the Ripper in Dr. Strangelove. And it is very odd seeing both him and Peter Sellers in this movie in the same year that Dr. Strangelove was made, which is, you know, certainly a far better anti-war movie. We can say that much. This film doesn't do that well on the anti-war front, really.
I don't think it is anti-war.
It kind of has a tinge of that, but yeah, I know what you mean. It's sort of, by the end, as
long as the UN is doing it, you know, or that's what's so odd is like, it's sort of like if the UN gives the blessing, then war is okay. You know, or the movie does kind of pit we should talk with the Russians. But of course, if Adolf Hitler II came to power, we would have to wipe out all those people. Which is a really odd message. Which I think it's a conflicted
and confusing message as well. But anyway, getting back to Hayden, he's in the OSS. He was in Black Operations. He was like smuggling people around Europe and that kind of thing. He was, very much a hands-on, on-the-ground spy, in the, James Bond manner or whatever you want to call it. Then he comes back. Obviously, OSS is disbanded. He goes back into Hollywood. But by this point, he's made friends with quite a lot of communists because, of course, during the war, the communists were on our side, the side of the Allies. And this was actually a problem that goes into that whole conflict between the OSS and the FBI, and then ultimately the FBI and the CIA, is that the FBI hated communists because communists were the problem before the war, and then they were again the problem after the war, at least as far as J. Edgar Hoover saw it. Fascism was just some sort of temporary blip in the middle of that. He was actually, I guess, ideologically a communist of sorts, at least for a while. And I've been going through a lot of the FBI files on Hollywood and looking at Ronald Reagan, the section on Ronald Reagan when he was spying for the FBI in Hollywood. And he comes up a fair bit. There's one bit where he's talking about, he was actually, for a while, he was part of a communist cell within Hollywood, and that they were trying to gain influence in the industry and ultimately manipulate films and so on. But he says they were completely and totally unsuccessful.
Right.
Which I thought was quite funny. He's a weird guy that fits into this thing that we've talked about before, where you have this strange situation in post-war Hollywood where, the CIA were anti-Soviet and distinctly anti-Soviet, and pretty much all of the films that they were involved in the 1950s at least, are primarily aimed at being some kind of anti-Soviet propaganda, rather than pro-CIA propaganda or whatever else they could have been doing. And yet, a significant number of the people who were either actual communists in Hollywood, or at least were accused of being that, or were somehow involved in that side of things, either have OSS or CIA connections, or actually worked for OSS or worked for the CIA. And against that, you've got the FBI, you've got UAC, the Un-American Affairs Committee. Later on, I guess you've got McCarthy, which is a kind of the political outgrowth of that. And they were, rabidly anti-communist. And so you kind of wonder, was this cultural Cold War at that point ultimately a result of this turf war between the agencies, and didn't actually have a huge amount to do with communism one way or the other? And I think Sterling Hayden is a good example of that. I'm going to try and put together a podcast on all of this, because you can actually read his OSS file and stuff like that now. So I'm going to dig into the details a bit more and see if I can get a better handle on him. But certainly an interesting guy to turn up in a film like this. And why would they put someone who, I think he testified at the HUAC hearings. I think he quite famously testified at that and kind of held up his hands and said, I was a communist for a while. So why would they put him in the lead role? In this? Is that just to piss off the John Birch Society types?
And after he sort of rips on the John Birch Society and Dr. Strangelove, because of course the Jack Ripper, and I think kind of, that's one thing I sort of, a gripe to pick with that is that, he makes the whole discussion of fluoride look very silly. And of course it is very funny the way he, talks, what is the purity of life and of course,
fluids and
right. And of course, fluoridation of water is not a communist plot. It's an American. It's just I don't know what you would say, but it is, here it's not communist. The government was allowing this to happen. But he is clearly a John Birch Society member. In Dr. Strangelove. So no, it is, that was sort of, when you were talking there, kept kind of popping into my head. And then I was just thinking, about Sterling Hayden's career, and he's in a few other movies. He's in a movie, I don't know if you've ever seen it, Johnny Guitar. It's by Nicholas Ray. And it's, no. Oh my God. It's probably it's got Joan Crawford in one of her greatest roles of all time. Who plays this sort of menacing, I don't know, almost like a proto-lesbian, character. It's like a Western, sort of. But it does have this sort of decidedly, it's very critical of like the McCarthy witch hunts and stuff. So Sterling Hayden does have a career of kind of embracing what I think on the outside would look, sort of leftist movies or leftist ideals. And I wonder if that's not like totally deliberate or that he was urged to do something like that. I feel like the more that we look into the kind of cultural Cold War, what was going on in the 50s particularly, and the 60s as well, and the amount of CIA-connected people and sometimes just true CIA agents that worked in Hollywood and were kind of pushing for, like, why is what's his name, Michael Redgrave in so many the CIA-produced movies, when clearly he was viewed as a threat by the FBI for his communist links, and I could only say the same, right, and MI5, and I could only say the same for Sterling Hayden. So it does make you wonder if, I don't know, if a particular guy that he knew in Hollywood who, I don't know, maybe knew him back from OSS, and, you should definitely try and be in this movie. I just wonder, because I know that Sterling Hayden has also had talked publicly about his kind of dislike of the film industry, and that he did a lot of these movies basically to support his passion for sailing. So, when you like hate Hollywood, but you do these fairly political movies, and it's not like just one or two, it's like a whole string of them, it does make you wonder if there's something more to that. And then especially with like the UN one, it's like amazing how many of these Hollywood actors were like lining up trying to, I mean, supposedly the rumor is that Kubrick was going to make one of these UN movies.
Really?
I've seen that floated on different articles that I found. I have no idea how well that is, sourced or whatnot. But, I mean, it was like a who's who. You look at. I
suppose they got some very big names involved in this. I suppose I'd just be a little surprised that Kubrick would be involved in a TV movie. But then I suppose this is earlier on in his career, before he was the kind of, tyrannical creative force that he very much became in his later career. So maybe it does make sense. Okay.
Well, or look at it this way too. I mean, Mankiewicz again. I mean,
very big name.
Was very big name, and again, totally knew what was going on when The Quiet American was being made. I mean, he was actively talking with Edward Lansdale. He was, sending scripts.
He had some sort of relationship with Alan Dulles as well, although we're not exactly sure.
Right.
It's a problem with The Quiet American passing out exactly how much of this is CIA influence or CIA encouragement, or is Mankiewicz's own ideas but being encouraged then by the CIA, and so on and so forth. But undoubtedly the CIA had some kind of hooks into that project, and Mankiewicz knew this and was happy for that. So, that's who he was, certainly.
And then, he goes and makes his UN movie. I almost just wonder, I mean, do you think these celebrities even really knew about the UN? Or particularly cared? I mean, Peter Sellers? I don't think he had the capacity for political thought. And I'm not trying to knock him. I love Peter Sellers, but he is, talk about tyrannical.
Well, I guess also they might have thought, you have to see it another way round, is that for a lot of celebrities, they spend their lives in Hollywood living these relatively vapid, superficial lives where the most challenging thing they have to face is the press, who are ultimately mostly there to kind of be parasites leeching off their fame anyway. So there's only, the Hollywood press will only ever get so hostile towards someone because they can't afford to be too hostile, otherwise, that kind of ruins the whole game for everyone. So that when a chance comes along that, the UN is interested in making this, this sort of high-budget film TV series. That's, I'd like to be involved in that. That's like, it gives some sort of meaning to this rather stupid existence that a lot of them led. I mean, some of them are overtly political people who clearly were involved in this to some extent because of their politics, and they actually believed in the messages of these films. But Ian Fleming?
Yeah, right? Come on.
That's something, I find that a bit odd. Ian Fleming was he didn't like the UN at all. That wasn't his political view of the world. His political view of the world is that we should be sneaking around behind the scenes, involving ourselves in absolutely everything, but covertly killing a lot of people, drinking as much alcohol as is physically possible, and
sleeping
being
with
a misogynist.
That walks.
Yeah, basically. That was Ian Fleming's political view. So I don't really see how he matches up with the UN, but at the same time, he might have just been asked, can you slap a spy story together that is somehow along these lines? I mean, he was a politically connected and intelligence-connected guy, I believe, right up until his death. I think it would have only been a couple of years later. In fact, I believe that was
the last thing he wrote.
Supposedly, yeah. So I can see how he ended up doing it, but he probably wasn't doing it for political reasons. Some of them would have been, and some of them would have been doing it because it was a chance to do something more interesting than another romantic comedy. So, yeah, that would be my guess on why. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I think those are all great, great answers or great explanations for why some of these people were taking the time to do these movies. I mean, I guess I suppose too. Yeah. I mean, nowadays it seems like celebrities or actors and actresses in general don't really care beyond their vapid existence. Celebrity has sort of, I don't know, moved on, and it just sort of now it's okay. Like, you look at like Kim Kardashian. It's like
it took a few generations for celebrity to become something where people didn't have a natural reaction to kind of, hang on, isn't there something wrong with this?
Yeah.
It's taken a few generations. Now we've got to the point where, at least for the people involved and a substantial number of the people watching them, no, there isn't a problem with this. Because I think, back in the certainly 20s, 30s, 40s, when all of this was first starting to take off, there was a hell of a lot more criticism and cynicism and just outright apathy towards this. Whereas nowadays, even people who are cynical and apathetic towards celebrities still know who quite a lot of these celebrities are. They can't avoid it. It's become so saturated that it's, a lot of that cynicism and criticism has kind of faded away because it's just become almost like an inevitability, just like the UN has. That, back then, again, a lot more criticism, a lot more cynicism, probably quite a lot more apathy. Now people just sort of generally, I'm sort of in favour of it. I dislike some bits of it, but, I don't really know or care enough. So it's there now. It is what it is.
It's almost just like, it's like just the sky. You take it for granted.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just, that's it.
There's no point. The UN at this point doesn't seem to really be on the table. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, but it is odd. How would you even go about doing that? How would you even summon up the political will to do that? Would anyone even care enough to do it? I mean, a few people would, but you know what I mean. But it kind of represents that how do we actually dismantle a function of government in general terms, or a part of government that just isn't working, that isn't accomplishing the things we want it to, and so therefore we should probably just take it apart and try something else.
Let alone a global entity like the UN, which is, there was like a lot of talk when, President Duarte in the Philippines was saying he was going to leave. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess so, but how do you even go about that? But anyway, we're at the break now. We will be continuing in the second hour with Tom Secker on more about this, and maybe we'll switch gears as well.
practically narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Are you feeling embarrassed and stuck because you can't focus or concentrate? I have a confession to make. I spent years unable to think clearly, like I was in a fog. I was going through the motions, running my companies, and I hated feeling groggy and mentally sluggish. I couldn't get ahead like this. It's no secret, the powers that be want us dumbed down. Chemicals, fluoride, our brains are under siege, and we are experiencing lower IQs. But now there's a weapon to fight back and win. Introducing DNA Evolve, a revolutionary breakthrough in a category of cognitive enhancers called nootropics. I've been using DNA Evolve and couldn't feel better. For me, it works. It feels great to get things done again and get ahead. Try a free sample for yourself at DNAEvolveSample.com. That's DNAEvolveSample.com. Supplies are limited, so go to DNAEvolveSample.com right now.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of microplant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
What about show business? Show business, completely dishonest, corrupt, and full of shit, but in a nice way. Plenty of expensive drugs and perverted sex. If you're going to be full of shit, might as well enjoy your work. Then you have the media. Not just the news media, let's include them all. The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit because they're located right at the crossroads of all the other bullshit. The media are made up of equal parts advertising, politics, business, public relations, and show business. These people are sitting right at bullshit junction. There's enough bullshit in the media for Texas to open a branch office. And you still have enough left over to start 2 law firms and a Christian bookstore.
What has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Provide us with free education?
Well, that's obviously effective, but apart from reversing the dumbing down of America...
All the information they provide is free?
What about the free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, man?
Exploiting commonplace corruption?
They help vulnerable people who don't have a voice?
Bringing light to important information nobody else does.
Or they never censor, hang up, or cut off their guests? Well, that's no fun, is it?
Oh, they created a fantastic alternative media source during an era of bad, manipulative, and infiltrated mainstream and alternative media shows and scam.
Okay, well, apart from the free education, free information, free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, exposing commonplace corruption, helping vulnerable people without a voice, bringing light to important information nobody else does, and creating a fantastic commercial-free alternative media source in a sea of bad, manipulative mainstream and alternative media shells and scum, what has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Donate to American Freedom Radio today. No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City. Your host, Pierce Redmond.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second hour of Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. Tom Secker is joining us again in the second hour. And before we dive into a little bit more about A Carol for Another Christmas, I just quickly wanted to say, because I get this question virtually nonstop, what is the theme song for your show? So I'll just say it now, even though I know I'll probably be repeating this until, the show is no longer on air. But it is a song, the song is called, the name of the song is Polaris, and it is by a group called Cyber People. And you can find that on YouTube. They're a pretty, well-known Italo-disco group. So Cyber People, Polaris is the name of the song. So you can check it out there. And of course, good friend Chuck Ocelli does the voice over for that song, for my theme song. But anyway, we're back with Tom Secker. We kind of went a little all over the place in the first hour with talking about A Carol for Another Christmas, this interesting movie produced by the UN and the Xerox Corporation. But we wanted to at least touch on what I think is probably the best, most interesting, and the most well done a portion of the movie, and that is when Daniell Grudge visits with the ghost of Christmas Future. And he is brought to this post-apocalyptic world where at some point nuclear war kind of took part all over. They're never sure as to who really, who struck first. They just know that, everyone started launching their nukes. And most of society has been wiped out, although there are conveniently in Daniell Grudge's neighborhood, there are still a few people left. And they, and they're all, I don't know, living in these sort of bombed out houses and, with rags around them and, not a very good life. And they are ruled over by Peter Sellers, who plays this character called Imperial Me. And I remember when Tom and I were first told about this movie, Betty was saying that, Imperial Me definitely reminded her of Trump. And watching it last night, I totally understand what Betty means by that. Because, of course, Imperial Me, he plays on people's fears. He talks about how there's a group down the river that they're aware of, but, they don't let them into their sort of section of territory. But this group downriver, they want to talk and maybe work together. And of course, Imperial Me riles them all up. And it's talking about how dangerous they are, how they want to come here and, corrupt us and kill us and use and abuse us and whatnot. And, he's also, they're always chanting. He has this sort of very kind of jovial assholishness that Donald Trump can have in his rallies. But Tom, what did you think of Imperial Me and in particular this whole final section?
I think you're right. I think it's by far the best section of the whole film. And you can kind of see why this is persuasive to our central character, to Mr. Grudge, as to why it is that this changes his mind, that he's being shown this vision of a future where almost everyone is dead, almost everything is destroyed. And all you've really got left is this kind of gang or cult that's following this clownish, psychopathic figure around who is ultimately, he's like a hyper-individualist in the sense that only like a psychopath can be, that he's telling all of this crowd of people, we're going to eradicate the word we. We're going to eradicate any notion of collectivism, of collective desire, of collective ambition, of working together, and that ultimately it's about the rise of the individual, and that the logical conclusion of this is that once they've eradicated these people down the river who want to talk and want to involve themselves, and, they now represent, I guess, the spirit of the UN, or at least of some kind of cooperation between people, which in the post-apocalyptic world would simply be necessary. I mean, by that point, kind of ideology goes out the window.
For the, human race to survive.
Yeah, but not for this guy. No. He's concerned with, once we've eradicated them, the outside threat. Of course, this is the joke. The outside threat is now like 6 miles away or something. And he said, eventually we're going to fight each other. And we're going to destroy each other until there's only like one man left standing. And that person is going to rule the whole world. And that is his vision. That's him. Yeah, of course. That's the implicit thing. And you've got this whole crowd. It becomes very Monty Python at one point, where all the crowd are all sort of shouting, like, "We are me's" or something. Or,
I think
like, we're all individuals. Yes, we are all individuals.
Yeah.
But it is this like. But if you're all shouting "me," then you're all shouting the same thing. So therefore, you're inherently some kind of collective.
Yeah.
So philosophically, the whole thing just falls apart and is ridiculous. And he is this Trump-like figure. He's sort of very, very clownishly dressed. He's absurd in his rhetoric. He's just sort of playing on people's basest emotions. And these people are total idiots. There's one point where, like when the guy goes up to the rafters, they're all shouting, jump, 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 jump. And it's like that's all it is. That's all it is to them by this point. Because, of course, everyone they know has died. Everything is destroyed. Everything is over. But, well, just that sense of self-preservation, and that's about it, really. So you can see sort of how this crowd has got to that point. But they have got to the point where death is just a joke. It's just entertainment. It's just some visceral, frivolous experience by now. Because I guess it would be the death of one person when billions have died. It might. I can, what I mean. I can see how the crowd has got to this point that they're believing in this psychopathic, hyper-individualist Peter Sellers clown character.
And it's a young boy that kills him. That kills the man.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the guy who climbs up the rafters is ultimately shot by this young boy, and it's just kind of shrugged off because now there is no laws and there is no court and there is no whatever. So there's nothing to be done about that, and that's a horrifying. Future vision of the world that doesn't quite sit in this film quite right. I mean, like you say, it's the most gripping and provocative part of the whole film. And yet it's kind of, I think it's partly because that's the point where it enters into fiction and dystopian fiction. And it's like, it's one thing to be bashing us over the head with the number of refugees and hungry people and people with tuberculosis in reality in the world now. It's another thing to be offering this hyper-dystopian vision of a post-apocalyptic future. And so the film, that's sort of where it broke away from what the film was really actually doing up until that point. And like you say, ironically, that's the best part of the film. So I did find it kind of confusing that was in there. But I guess when they're following this 3-part structure with Ghost of Christmas Past, Christmas Present, Christmas Future, what else were they going to do?
I almost wish that was the whole movie. And that was my impression. That's what I thought. Like, I thought that Peter Sellers would be like a main character. We would like learn more.
Sense. It would have made a better film. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And I think you still could have done that with, and still kind of hit it over the head of people's heads that, see, this is why we need the UN. And I don't know. I think that there is something, the power of fiction to convince people of stuff, whereas, they hear, 10 million displaced people and this many people dying of tuberculosis. And I think you kind of lose people sometimes with that, like the weight of statistics, or even the this whole sequence where Grudge is in Hiroshima. And he says this is horrible, but, it was necessary. And then he starts listing his statistics. And even that I think is you can get kind of like lost in that, whereas like, well, okay, maybe Hiroshima was necessary, but, is the world of Imperial Me, is that necessary? Was there some sort of validation or reasoning behind launching? Well, if we don't do this, then it's going to be so many people, millions of people or billions of people are going to die. Whereas like, I don't know. I mean, I almost wish that it had just been this sort of futuristic. I think that's also where Rod Serling is best at, or can be. Particularly just given how much he wrote, for the Twilight Zone. So yeah, I mean, I wanted like a whole lot more. I wanted to like know that whole world, and see what happened and see maybe, like, I don't know. I almost like wanted to see, Imperial Me kind of just like sitting in like, like a throne of ashes, the last man on earth. Like what would he do? And I think those sort of questions I found a lot more fascinating. And I think you can even, you can still be this anti-UN activist, but still fear, the world of Imperial Me. That's not necessarily like the answer, is to live in this sort of pseudo, I don't know, like, anti-collectivist society, but essentially being controlled by a cult leader, who views all of you as expendable. I mean, and I think it's unfair to say like, oh, well, that's what would happen without the UN. I mean, because of course that's the implicit idea here is that, without the UN, oh, well, there's no way we can talk to people. So I guess it's going to be, the apocalypse. That's a little bit crazy.
But this is where the film kind of totally breaks down from an intellectual point of view, and why ultimately I think isn't going to be that persuasive for people. Like we said in the first hour, it's more about giving them talking points than it is about actually giving them arguments.
Yeah.
Is because, okay, the film, in the bit in Hiroshima, you've got the American nurse who gets really upset. And when Mr. Grudge tries to give her, his numbers-based argument, she's sort of, no, can you stop talking about the mathematics? It's not about numbers. That isn't how we should see something like this. Then, in the following section, where he's with the ghost at the refugee camp, it's all about numbers. The argument is a mathematical argument. So what? What are they really saying there? That you can just throw numbers back and forth and that it doesn't win an argument? Well, yeah, okay, that's true, but I thought you were actually trying to make an argument in this film. So that's a big contradiction where it sort of starts to break down. And then you get into this fictional third section, this dystopian future. And the problem there is they're making an essentially emotive argument.
Yeah.
They're saying, look how terrible things could get. Oh, okay, yeah, they could get that terrible. So, what, therefore UN? I mean,
yeah.
How does that argument even work at that point? And given that this whole thing is kind of your classic progressive, certainly at that time leftist, we're rationalizing the world. We're making the world a better place because we're right. We have right on our side. We understand the world. We know what we're doing. We know how we're going to make it better. That, I don't know, like modernist leftist point of view, which is, I guess, still in existence in internationalism. It's just that's now kind of moved towards the center ground. It's no longer a leftist thing exclusively. But at this point, they're saying, no, reason, facts, numbers, that's all gone out the window. Now it's just, here's a horrifying vision of the future. Therefore, accept what we're saying, because otherwise this is our future. And that's the most base and manipulative way of trying to persuade someone that you could make. I mean, it makes a great cinema, like we keep saying, it's the best cinematic part of the whole film. And I totally agree. It would have been a more interesting film if the whole film was set in that world. And then they could have actually factored in some kind of intellectual argument. But it's kind of an admission by the end of the film that we can't persuade people with reason and facts. We actually just have to appeal to their emotions to get what we want out of them. And that's what ends up happening. So, you know what I mean? Implicitly, the film is admitting its own failings. And as a result, this is one of the reasons why I don't think it's very persuasive on an intellectual level.
No, because especially at the end, it basically is, the end kind of gives you this sense that you're just watching this long fear-based commercial for how wonderful the UN is. Because without us, then it's Imperial Me takes over and we're all dead.
As though there's no other option. As though there's no other. And it's like, And of course, the grand irony of this, where the thing completely breaks down for me, is where the guy's saying, well, we don't know who shot first. But if we don't know who shot first, what the hell is the point in the UN in all of this? They seem to have been completely impotent to have stopped this horrifying dystopian scenario. So therefore, who cares? Why should we be persuaded about the UN when this is what they're saying is a potential scenario? So you know what I mean? The film at that point is like, what argument are you even making anymore? I don't understand.
Yeah, no, so, I think that's a classic, that is representative of the UN. I don't think they know what the hell they're doing. I mean, it's like when I spoke to Matthew Lee, who's a journalist at the UN. I mean, he was just like, we talked after we recorded, and I was like, really, honestly, like, what the fuck goes on there? He's like, I couldn't tell you half the time. It's like a gentleman's club, with women, obviously. And they don't have like a mandate or an idea about what they're doing, and this movie is just indicative of that. And of course that's, I think, like Matthew Lee will give these sort of epic, go through these epic questioning sessions with UN spokespeople and stuff. And eventually and he will throw out so many facts and just, why wasn't this going on? How did you allow for these, rebels to come in and brutalize a whole hospital full of women and blah, blah, blah. And then
what happened at Srebrenica, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And then it gets down to the point where the UN spokesperson is like, you know what, Matthew, just, why can't you just write the nice things that we do? We just had a ribbon cutting ceremony at some fucking, I don't know, school that we built that'll probably fall down in a week. But, why can't you at least, just talk about that? And it is kind of like, that was how I felt with the end of this movie, is just sort of like, you just have to accept us. We have to exist. Okay. And even if we are, some sort of, terrible organization and blah, 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 or whatever, without us, it's fucking World War III, and, nobody wants that, I guess. Which is a very, like, as you said, it's such a base argument, and it's sort of like one of those arguments that, you kind of, I wonder if we could look at the three different ghosts as sort of the varying talking points, that one can use. And this final one is basically, it's when you run out of ideas, when you throw that out there, who in their right mind is going to say, no, I would like to live in the world of Imperial Me? Nobody in their right mind would actually wish any of this. But, and that's what makes it, I guess, a great, talking point to throw out, because there's really no way to talk that down. Although, as you said, it is like, well, what was the point of the UN? They couldn't stop this? What were they
doing when these missiles were flying through the air before they hit their targets and killed everyone? Because it doesn't seem like an awful lot. And they seem to...
No, go ahead, Tim.
Is deeply ironic, because they end up expressing a mentality in trying to make this persuasion of, just the UN is a good thing. They express almost the exact same mentality as Grudge expresses at the start of the film. They have the same kind of paranoid view of the world. And you kind of end up thinking, regardless of what political stripe you have, coming away from watching this film, would you feel better about the world or worse about the world? Because I have a feeling most people would feel worse. It's not it doesn't paint a particularly good picture of anything, to be honest. It kind of says that the world's shit. And is going to get unimaginably shitter one way or another. Seems to be the kind of overriding worldview running throughout all of these different ghosts and these ethereal experiences that he has. And so by the end of the film, when he delivers that somewhat emotive and more kind of optimistic speech, it's completely at odds with everything you've been watching for the previous hour and a half. And so it doesn't really work on an emotional level, let alone on an intellectual one. And I think, yeah, there are some deep, deep creative and intellectual problems with this movie. And I think that's I think there's a lesson there, actually, that making propaganda isn't that easy.
No.
That just trying to make a film that persuades the watching audience of a particular argument, especially when you're trying to tie in some abstract philosophical points and a lot of real world stuff, and you're looking at the past and looking forward to the future, and you're trying to do all of that in 90 minutes, it's no wonder it doesn't come off that well. Even with a good cast, good director, good writing, all of the components were there for this to have been a better film and a more, effective piece of propaganda than it was. But somewhere along the way, it just sort of got squeezed between the sides. And I think they tried to make too many arguments in the one film and tried to do too many things in the one film, and ultimately all ended up contradicting and conflicting with one another. But you're absolutely right that this kind of represents the modern day kind of impotence and futility of the UN. Because what do they even do? This is the question we keep coming back to, that okay, some people see them as some kind of communist plot to take over the world. I don't really buy that, because they don't seem to have enough power to do that. And I can't see them ever having enough power to do that, because they just kind of aren't taken seriously enough. But yeah, I mean, I listened to that interview with your friend who reports there, and this is everything that I kind of imagined it would be like. He described it, and beyond Wonderland. That, even worse than I imagined it was like.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, and Matthew Lee said, he's like, listen, I'm not like an anti-UN journalist. He says, there are some things that, at least in principle, are good that the UN does, but when like France controls all peacekeeping forces at the UN, so essentially France has this second army that is above any laws. UN peacekeepers are rarely, if ever, tried for war crimes or it wouldn't even enter into the UN's mind that their peacekeepers could ever be punished. And essentially the French just use the UN peacekeepers to as a cover to recolonize Africa. And they do it rather blatantly. They don't even really lie about it. It's like that's what the UN does. It's a great place.
Or like is it 4 out of the top 5 arms exporters in the world are permanent members of the Security Council?
Yes.
So this whole notion that they're preventing war is a farce. It's just not really happening. This whole thing about, we haven't had another world war since we founded the United Nations. Well, no, we haven't. But that's not because we founded the United Nations. It's for other reasons.
It's not a coincidence that Saudi Arabia, was just sort of lifted to, I forget whatever. They're on like the sort of like rotating, Human Rights Council or
Saudi
Security
Arabia.
Council. Yeah. And there's no coincidence between that and their complete escalation and utter destruction of Yemen. They've got complete immunity from that. They're never going to be, no one will ever be able to hold them accountable for that. It's like that's what the UN is basically like this. For all intents and purposes, I think the evil part about the UN is that they're kind of pretty much okay with allowing anybody to do this. It's not, we make a lot of pronouncements about how evil the Russians and the Chinese are, but it's fine. Nothing ever happens to them at the UN,
No, sure. That's a game that's played largely on a media level. It's not really about anyone actually doing anything. Yeah.
No, so everybody can make money at the UN. Everybody can basically cover up whatever fucking horrible things they want to. And it's basically, I get why people want to work there. It's it's a cushy job. You're an ambassador in New York City. You're getting paid well. You park wherever the hell you want to in the city. And you're completely above the law. And it's awesome. Who wouldn't, like Matthew would talk about the UN, they'd have these like long, these like press conferences or meetings, and he would bring up all these sort of like real actual issues, and like, for instance, the massive bribery scandal, people mysteriously dying just before they're going to testify. You look at that, and then they all break, and it's like, all right, let's go to the bar. In the UN, there's a huge bar.
Of course there is. It's a political building.
Yeah, and it's just like, that's what's happening, It's just sort of, and everyone that works there is just kind of like, listen, I can't be bothered anymore, okay? I don't want to, I just want to talk about the nice thing. And that's what, in the end of Carol for Another Christmas, how does it end? With him sitting there, sort of, I guess now he's going to become some great, man of the people, and he's listening to children sing Christmas carols in other languages. It's like, that is perfect. This is what the UN represents. Let's throw a bunch of fucking kids out there, hands across America, and boom, we don't have to worry about anything else that we might have screwed up. It's like, that is, that's like what the UN wants, is everything to be kind of like a nice PR stunt for them, a nice photo op, a ribbon cutting ceremony, kids singing in different languages.
Well, and it was like, you remember earlier I think it was only a month or two back, there was this stupid story about them making Wonder Woman the kind of, international woman's ambassador for whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
And it was like, I was not the only one. There was quite a few people who were criticizing this and saying, well, you know what? They've turned down 7 different nominees for the Secretary Generalship this year, and again, given it to a man. And now, I'm not talking about whatever, positive discrimination and so on, but you would have thought sooner or later, at some point in this organization's existence, if they really cared about the things that they say, just would have thought, purely by statistics alone, they would have been a female Secretary General of the UN, but there hasn't been, and there still isn't, and there isn't going to be next time. So instead, what do? They make a fictional character from a relatively unpopular film series that's taken quite a lot of shit from audiences and critics, and therefore isn't the best PR value, all of which suggests they don't even know which cartoon character to pick as their, representation of women's rights. So they've done that. Okay. Great.
Yeah, right.
That's really going to make the women of the world feel better about themselves.
I know.
And the greatest irony of all of this, sorry, but the thing that kind of completely blows my mind about this and represents, to my mind, the total contradiction and pointlessness of the United Nations is that back in, I think it was the late 1940s, they recognized a citizen's right to information from their government as like a fundamental human right, or effectively a fundamental democratic right. Okay. But the UN themselves have no Freedom of Information Act. You can't get their documents.
Yeah.
They're saying, oh, right, yeah, people should be able to get their documents from their own government in their own countries, but not from this quasi-self-appointed internationalist body that no one's really sure, like, who's running this, for what purpose. Okay, we can't find out, because they have no Freedom of Information process. So, it's a joke. Yeah. It's like they love naming things and pronouncing things. Oh, we're going to devote this week to refugees. We're going to devote that day to black people. Whatever. Does any of it mean anything, ultimately? Not a huge amount, it doesn't seem. Not to me, anyway.
No, and whenever there's an actual scandal where the UN is directly implicated, you were just mentioning, Tom, who cares about Wonder Woman and stuff? One of the many ongoing scandals at the UN is at the Terrain Hotel compound, which is in South Sudan, where these UN peacekeepers basically they knew full well that every woman in this apartment complex was going to be raped and or killed, and they did nothing. And the UN has nothing of substance to say on this. They either don't want to talk about it and are very open about it, or you got to ask this person. Well, you ask that person. No, ask this person. I'm not really technically, I can't really talk on this right now. Or, we're looking into it. So don't worry. Come back in about a year or two, and maybe we'll have dug something up on this. No, and it's It's Wonder Woman. That's what we want to talk about. I don't know. I mean, yeah, the more you look at it, it is like, what is the point of this organization? And does anyone in their right mind actually think that it would be World War III, with the Imperial Me government if the UN didn't exist? I just can't understand how you could even get there, because what does the UN ever do to prevent these sort of, small scale apocalypses? I mean,
you could say it provides a platform for people to go and air some grievances, and that may ultimately have some kind of effect in forestalling or putting off wars that might otherwise happen. But when it comes to the big stuff, I mean, there you're mostly talking about, two relatively small countries who are just sort of shouting at each other at the UN and were probably never going to go to war anyway because neither of them could afford it. When it comes to the big stuff, Iraq, Syria, what have they done? Have they done anything to try and prevent these wars or shorten them or, find peaceful diplomatic solutions to what's going on in Syria? Not that I can see. So, yeah, you do have to wonder, if you took it away, would anyone notice?
No.
I mean, there's quite a lot of parts of government that I think are inefficient and relatively incompetent, but I also do think if you took them away, people would notice. With the UN, I just don't see it. I mean, what would we miss? The occasional news item about the UN has announced that this is, the day when this is Chicken's Day or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
Wherever the hell it is they're going next with their endless pronouncements of things. Yeah.
Yeah. World Peace Day and for, the Southern Hemisphere, whatever. Yeah, no, I mean, every day is a fucking holiday at the UN. Oh, that's the other thing too. And they, it's like they don't do anything on those days. It's like if there's a holiday or a pronouncement or something like that at the forget about actually, stopping the violence in Syria, because we all got to go to the ceremony, and then schmooze and drink and hang out and drink lots of expensive wine and sausage rolls. Yeah. Forget about actually helping people that are dying. No, I know. I mean, it and I think again it does really kind of demonstrate how. I think you're right in saying that it's not necessarily simple to make a propaganda film, or an effective one. Although certainly there were very overt, wartime propaganda films that would really, hit it over the head that whatever, we have to fight the Nazis or, the Nazis must fight the Americans. I think they could have done that with this movie, but the problem is that the UN doesn't know what the hell they're trying to do. The UN is as mismanaged as this film was in so many ways. And I think they could have probably made an effective documentary series highlighting the good things that the UN does.
That would have been a lot more successful at actually persuading people in the watching audience than this film ever was. Yeah.
But but when you really start dissecting what this organization is and what it's supposed to be doing, you are left with this question of it's like a contradiction everywhere you turn.
So I guess you're saying what would be in those documentaries? What would they actually be able to show them?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think in the documentary they could have just shown, vaccination programs or something, or handing out loaves of bread. And I'm not sure, but I'm sure they could have done something that would have just, convinced, instead of this sort of like weird political film that kind of goes nowhere. Which also leaves you with this like, oh God, so it's either we accept the UN as a fairly useless organization or it's World War III. Like, what a depressing world that you have to live in.
Well, I think this is quite an early example of it, but nonetheless, I think it is an example of this, is like the failure or even the myth of the liberal consensus. This notion that among the intelligentsia, academics, journalists, artists, so on, that there is this notion of some kind of progress towards a better world, and that's possible, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're all sort of participating in, the right-thinking people are participating in. But the problem is, there's never been any agreement on what that world looks like. There's never been you either have this Hegelian notion, the dialectical notion that we are gradually working our way towards an ultimate, perfect, or at least as good as it can get society, and at that point history will stop. The dialectic will stop. It will cease to go backwards and forwards. But no one's ever actually come up with what will the end of history look like? And so no one's really come up with a way of saying, well, how do we measure whether we're getting any closer to it or further away from it at any given point in time? Let alone has anyone come up with therefore these are the policies we should actually execute in the world to try and hasten the process towards this, better world. And as a result, they've built this thing, the United Nations, which is supposedly a vehicle for that sort of, leftist, progressive, liberal consensus type of idea. But none of them are really sure what it's for. None of them are really sure, well, okay, what's this supposed to be bringing about? What set of circumstances is it supposed to be creating? And therefore, what have they got to offer? The avoidance of World War III, the avoidance of catastrophe. In the absence of a utopia, we can only promise you the absence of dystopia. And so that's sort of what this film does. And is, in that respect, I think is actually a really good example of something that's become evidently more clear in the 50 or however many years since then. That, that whole liberal consensus, they don't have a clue what it is that they're actually... The consensus doesn't really exist because they don't actually agree on anything, because no one's really come up with anything for them all to agree on. It's just a sort of vague thing that a lot of people pay lip service to because you kind of have to if you want to get on in those sorts of worlds. But as a result, the real world net effect of this is very little. And that's sort of what this film represents, I guess.
Oh, maybe in that sense it is successful, or as a propaganda, we suck and we're terrible, but hey, it's not World War III.
It is in some senses, it's the most honest film that's ever been made about the UN. If you interpret it in that way.
I don't know if that was Rod Serling's intention or the UN's, but it does. That's a fascinating aspect to this. Is the it almost like this sort of chicken or the egg kind of question. Like, was the UN like this? Therefore, the movie reflects that, or is the UN reflecting the movie? Has the UN become what the movie is essentially portraying? Again, this useless organization, but hey, it's not. At least it's still standing, right? It's not just rubble, on the side of the East River.
Well, that's the thing. Whenever they talk about the UN on the television, what do you see? You see the building.
Right.
Yeah, we built a building. We've got a headquarters.
Yeah,
well,
General Assembly.
What are you actually doing? That's what we keep coming back to. And it's like, but look at our fantastic headquarters.
And they always want to build another one.
Exactly, because what else are they actually going to do? That's how you prove that you exist as an organization, particularly when you don't have any idea what you're actually for. You just have this sort of general mentality. First we have to have an institution, we have to have a building, we have to have some budgets, we have to have some departments, we've got to have some named officials, we've got to have some kind of bureaucratic process. Because you just build all of those things even in the absence of an idea of what is all of this for? What are we actually trying to do and accomplish here? In a way, the UN is a fantastic demonstration that you can actually do all of those things without having any intention in mind. Really having any idea why you're doing it. You can still do all of this. And I know it's gigantically kind of wasteful and stupid, but I mean, there are worse institutions in the world than the United Nations.
Yeah, probably. I mean,
I
NATO.
doubt that there are more pointless institutions than the United.
Yeah. No, I think that's always what kind of just hits me is, is NATO killing more people? Undoubtedly. Is the CIA and MI6 and, all foreign intelligence agencies? Yeah, that terrifies me more, generally speaking, than the UN. But yeah, as an institution of truly nothing but opulence and corruption, the UN just kind of takes the cake. Because they, with a straight face, these people will tell you we are doing, God's work out there. This is all good. Without us, it would be World War III. And you really just look at them like, dude, how do you sleep at night?
It's because they're surrounded by people with the same mentality, saying the same things.
Yeah.
Like I say, this sort of consensus that kind of exists in that everyone is standing around agreeing with one another, but do any of them actually understand what they're agreeing on? Do any of them actually care? Or is it all just paying lip service to something so that they can, keep getting that free champagne? I mean, it seems like it's the latter to me. It really does.
I was just picturing Security Council or General Assembly meeting, where the cameras are off and everyone in there just shouting me, like in the end of the movie. 'Cause that is also that's what it's all about, It's just about, what can I do here that's going to benefit myself? Because all of these ambassadors and the sort of higher up officials, like Ban Ki-moon and his deputies and stuff, they do absolutely nothing other than wheel and deal with, billionaires and corporate interests. And again, ironic that Xerox, here's $4 million, to make these movies. Just again, the sort of the connection between, this globalist, governmental agency and a corporation. What does Xerox care, about any of this? Or I guess, what has Xerox done to help people?
Well, that's why, I mean, if they really wanted to help, I'm sure they could have done better things with those $4 million in 1964, which is quite a lot of money in 1964.
Oh my God. Imagine how many hospitals they could have built.
Well, any number of things, build a good road network somewhere so people can trade more or, a million and one things we could think of that you could do with $4 million in 1964 that would have been better than making these films. But yeah, it kind of represents the impotence of the UN, that you could give them $4 million, and what will they do? They'll make 4 or 5 not very good movies.
Just piss it away.
Yeah, piss it away on some television movies that no one liked.
Right. And who's to say that they actually spent the $4 million on those movies?
Doesn't really look like it, does it?
No, would they spend $1 million a piece on I mean, that would have been a huge sum of money for a TV movie back in the 60s.
Wouldn't have a fair amount for a Hollywood movie.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. Right. I mean, it's like you have to laugh. It's so ridiculous. They're so, they're just so fucking useless. I don't know. I guess, what'd you have to say, Tom?
Well, just to make a brief comparison between the UN and the European Union, there is a similar kind of feel to that where everyone only goes into this with their national interests in mind.
Yeah.
That's partly why now we're in a period when an awful lot of nations are looking at it and thinking, our national interests, we can't quite get what we want out of this, so why don't we just sack it off and do something else and pursue our national interests another way? That's kind of what's happening. And again, this is part of this. It's because the people putting together the internationalist organization don't really know what it is they're trying to accomplish by doing that. It's just this sort of shared mentality. It's just a kind of weird groupthink among a bunch of people. And so as a result, people come in, it serves their national interest for a while, but then they sod off because it's no longer doing what they want it to. And because the people who were actually building this thing in the first place are basically standing there saying, but we want this to exist. That's kind of the only argument they've really got left at this point. They can't really say, it needs to exist for this or that reason, or, And there again, I hear this same argument that, no, there hasn't been a war in Europe since we created the European Union. And I'm thinking, well, firstly, that's a complete lie. There's been quite a number of wars in Europe since the creation of the European Union. That's just, historical fact. But again, it's like this notion that, oh, well, without that, well, then we'd have World War II all over again. Would we?
Yeah, I know. Well, loose definition of Europe, too.
Yeah, or is it actually a case of these nations, France, Germany, Spain, Britain, the big imperial European nations have finally figured out that killing each other probably isn't getting you anywhere? Is that actually what's happened? And it's got nothing to do with the European Union at all. They haven't prevented war whatsoever. They just like to take the credit for it. And it's because they don't really have a vision, because they don't really know what they're doing, because they don't really have anything except a sort of vague mentality behind why they're doing this. As a result, they have to try and take credit for things that have nothing to do with them, because otherwise they don't really have an argument for their own existence. And I'm just saying, just like the UN, that you could apply the exact same argument to the EU, and it's not all that surprising to me to see it kind of certainly creaking and fragmenting a bit at this point in time.
No, absolutely. Well, okay, Tom, on that note, and it is Christmas time. Christmas is around the corner, and it does seem. We were talking during the break. It's like it does seem like this sort of the world is ending, and what is the point of these sort of institutions and stuff? And we've got, Mr. Imperial Me himself, Donald Trump, about to take office. I was saying, the Russian ambassador gets killed. Some nut in Germany runs over a bunch of people. The, war in Syria is winding down in Aleppo. But it's still not quite over just yet. I don't know, Tom. Are we on a path for World War III, or is that just the do we just sort of like feel that in waves over and over and over again? And I know that that's like a kind of crazy huge question. But it does always kind of come up, at the end of the year geopolitically, when all the idiots get together to talk about what happened this year, and what's on the horizon. So I don't know. What do you think about that? Is this is it going to be Carol for Another Christmas, or are we going to be okay?
Well, I always have the attitude, and people accuse me of being complacent for having this attitude that, rumors of the apocalypse have been greatly exaggerated. I don't see we're actually in real terms all that much worse off than we were a year ago at the end of the last year.
Yeah.
I'm not sure fundamentally anything has really changed. A lot of the window dressing has changed, and I dread to think what the next White House is going to do. But in reality, is it going to be that much different from what the current one, the outgoing one, has done? Probably not. And certainly from my perspective, in living my life in rural Yorkshire, it's probably not going to make much difference at all to me, except in as much that it has a lot of people's attention. A lot of people, get some kind of emotional hook into them because of this. But I know what you mean. The last week, normally the week before Christmas, is not like a bad news week. It's usually a trivial nonsense news week. It's stuff about, Kim Kardashian's having a baby or whatever.
Yeah.
And instead, we do seem to have had this flurry of rather disturbing events. I can see why the Russian ambassador story, why that became international news. I'm really not quite sure why this thing in Berlin has. I mean, it's horrible, don't get me wrong. Someone, for whatever reason, has just plowed a van into a crowd of people and killed a dozen of them, 14 of them, something like that. But ultimately, why is that a huge news story?
Because he might be Pakistani. Because Daesh claimed responsibility.
For some nutter crashing a car into a crowd.
I know. People buy that.
I mean, honestly, if this guy was a member of ISIS or some kind of like serious gang or something, he wouldn't be crashing a car into someone. He'd be shooting them or blowing them up with explosives. That's what serious terrorists do. All of which suggests to me much more likely to be a crazy person, and still potentially a politically or religiously crazy person, but nonetheless, the fundamental problem here appears to be insanity rather than anything else. Because otherwise, like I say, they would be more together. They would have a better means of carrying out their violent, act. So why that story? I mean, I understand why that story, but I'm just saying, from a completely realist perspective, Why is that? Why have you heard about that over in the States? Why does it matter?
I don't know.
As soon as it happened, it was the number one news item in this one.
I know. Almost at times to the exclusion of the Russian ambassador being killed almost on live television. And somehow, Erdogan, all the Erdogan-friendly media got their hands on that video. How did that video get out of either it was being broadcast live or it was recorded and somebody took the video and gave it to the media almost immediately. I had no idea how the hell that happens, at an alarming speed. But I don't know. I don't know. If I was to think like, I don't know, put my tinfoil hat on, there's almost this it has been this growing, apocalypse or something. And I don't know, maybe, Trump will be the sort of phoenix or the Jesus rising from the ashes to save us all, and usher in a new world order, to use a phrase, that's very popular. I don't know. I mean, it does seem like they are just sort of hyping us up for some sort of disaster that I think will ultimately not happen, But maybe, I don't know, maybe they just need to keep us on our toes. I've mentioned this before and people poo-pooed me, but we're due another 9/11. Maybe that's what this is all leading up to, which I don't think is crazy.
I don't think it's crazy. I mean, I hope not. But
so do I, of course.
And I also wonder, there again, where does that kind of mentality ultimately get us? I'm not denying any of the things that you just said. I'm just sort of wondering, is there, given that it is supposedly Christmas time, so I read in between the stories of, about Donald Trump and people getting run over and ambassadors getting murdered. And, apparently there is going to be some kind of Christmas this week. I do wonder, maybe it's just partly that they're just kind of trying to shit on us through the media. And, at a time of year when we're supposed to be relaxing and maybe enjoying ourselves a bit, that the news is full of woe and death and destruction and the imminent apocalypse. And that maybe it's more just a psychological thing than anything else. It's just a sort of, the consequence of nasty government and nasty media who are full of spineless, cretinous people. They don't want us to have a good time.
I wonder if it's, right. It's like the Clinton, or the pro-Clinton media is bummed that, Hill Dogs isn't in there, so they're only going to give us nasty stuff. And the Trump people love fear porn, so they're only going to give us nasty stuff. And then the rest of the media, as you said, is this sort of spineless, and maybe they're just sort of reveling in the fact that they don't have to do the sort of puff piece Christmas time stories, about, I don't know, candlelight vigils and stuff like that.
Kids singing carols in Times Square, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you, they're not showing are the Christmas lights in the liberated sections of Aleppo. No. That's not a story. Or the fact that the war over there might be coming to some sort of a not reasonable ending, but certainly, I'm sorry, but Assad has won, at least in Aleppo. In that area, yes. Syria, he has won. That's, sorry guys.
Kind of over. Yeah.
Over, right. Yeah.
But no, these would be better stories. Certainly that one about lights in Aleppo. You do kind of wonder, isn't that exactly the sort of story they should be reporting at Christmas time? But no, for these sick, unpleasant people, which most journalists are.
Yeah, it's only the nasty stuff. Well, anyway, Tom, thank you for joining us today. I will be playing a pre-recorded episode next week, all on the CIA and comic books. But until then, I will talk to you soon.
news and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.